So for this Christmas card, I'm gonna use the Reindeer set by Chloe and Crafter's Companion, along with the Festive Phrases stamp set. This is gonna be a great way to try your hand at watercolors without having to be a watercolor artist. I'm gonna use the Amethyst and the Aquamarine in the Spectrum Noir Sparkle inks in a jar. These are the glitter inks. I'm also gonna use a little watercolor palette here. It's gonna help me control the intensity of the color. And just some plain water. If you mist your palette ahead of time, it makes blending out the colors, diluting them a little bit quicker. Okay, I've trimmed my watercolor cardstock down to 4 by 5 1/4, since our card base is gonna be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And all I'm really doing here is taking some water and some color and just kind of putting it down on the cardstock. And this is just gonna give a place for my deer to live. I'm just gonna let this blend out. And that's really it. That's the whole base. I'm gonna let it dry. And as this dries, that sparkle from the inks is gonna become more intense. It's gonna look really pretty, especially for Christmas. I'm just gonna use the heat gun to speed things up. Remember, with watercolor, it's always gonna look a little bit lighter when it's dry than when it's wet. If you find your paper's warping, just come at it from the back a little bit. It'll flatten it back out. Keep the heat nice and even. See, it's so easy. To be able to get a background like that, you don't need to be a watercolor artist. Okay, I'm gonna set this aside and I'm gonna die cut my reindeer. So with my leftover piece of watercolor cardstock, I'm just lining up that reindeer die, holding it down with a little bit of washi tape, plastic shim, magnetic, top plate, and I'm using the Gemini Junior. There we go. And the deer is basically going to live right on top of our little watercolor background there. Looks cute, but I want there to be a little bit of dimension. I want the deer to cast a little bit of a shadow. Do you see that shadow? Right on my background. And to do that, I'm going to use foam tape. Okay, so before I put my reindeer on, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. Now I can add my reindeer. Okay, and I'm just going to use some liquid glue and just a few little sequins to add a couple little embellishments. I'm just going to put down a little bit of white glue just on my mat here. And I'm gonna pick up my sequins. And I don't want too many pieces of sequins, just enough for a few little embellishments. I'm also gonna do a very clean and simple card base. So I'm just gonna take a piece of white cardstock and trim it down to 4 1/4 and then score it at 5 1/2. I want the card to have a little bit more dimension, so I'm also gonna put those foam squares all across the back. I'm using the big chunky ones from Crafter's Companion. You could also just cut a piece of kids craft foam, anything to kind of bump it up a little bit. Peel off all the backs. I don't want to squash my reindeer when I'm holding this down. And that's it, a beautiful handmade by you Christmas card. I hope this helps you have an extra handmade Christmas.